All right, I want to speak from the subject. This is not the title, but this is the subject matter today, and it is principles for growth as a leader. Principles for growth as a leader. Why am I speaking it? Because I think as leaders, it is so easy to instill principles in everyone else, but where are your principles? So, I want to take us through today's subject, and the title for today's staffy is Left Behind. Not like the Kirk Cameron movies.
Epic.
I got that one always Christmas. I was over.
Not to be confused with the Kirk Cameron movies. One of actually Jack's favorites. Jack told me that one of his prerequisites for a first date is they sit together and they watch Left Behind, just to make sure that she will not be left behind. It's fantastic. Great leadership, Jack. You can confirm that with him later. So, Joshua 1 verse 2, I was reading this. This is the founding verse of our church. Hey, Law. It is the founding verse of our church, and I was just felt impressed to read it recently, and I would encourage all of you to read it because it is our founding verse. But I couldn't really get much further than the first few lines, and it grabbed me because I felt like, this has got a sting. And it was this, ready? After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I'm about to give them to the Israelites. Pause. Ouch.
Yeah.
If you don't really understand this moment in time in Scripture because you haven't read Numbers and you don't know the book of Exodus and you don't know Joshua, then all of a sudden you are going to feel like, oh, what a coincidence. Moses just died. Man, that sucks. He died right before it was time to cross over. If he just ate a little healthier, skipped a few of the empanadas, maybe didn't have a double cheeseburger a few times a little bit more often, he would have just lived and he would have crossed over. But man, how much does that suck? You work your whole life. You lead these people and, you just miss out. And it could look like coincidence when the reality was it was consequence. And I want to put it to us that as leaders, there comes a point where we start to believe in the coincidental instead of the consequential. And coincidental is it's such a coincidence that the thing I'm leading isn't growing. It's such a coincidence that the minute I stepped out, it grew. Such a coincidence that, and it's almost this coincidental nature that is very comforting because it's not as confronting. But what we know through this passage of Scripture is that it's not really coincidental as much as it's consequential. It is the consequence of, and I'm not, dogging on Moses. He's Moses. He's fantastic. He's done it. But even then, let that be a testament that no matter how good you are, this thing can elude any of us. Let that be the lesson here. That this thing can elude any of us. And what I mean by left behind is this simple statement that we're going to premise the whole teaching on today for all of us leaders is that it is possible to be overtaken by the plans of God and be left behind in the thing that God first called you to. Just because you qualified at the start doesn't mean you cross the finish line. And so that statement bugs me, irks me, scares me, makes me really fall into reverence for what it is that we do. Because I think that what we often believe is because we are caught up doing the work, that somehow that qualifies us to cross the finish line. But as a leader, can I tell you, one of the greatest things that we could be just watchful of is that whilst you're helping everybody else grow, make sure you don't forget to grow yourself. Paul, absolutely clear on this fact. In fact, he says, I buffet my body daily. He was a gym buff. He was he's a gym rat. He was a full-on gym rat. And he was I buffet my body daily so that I too don't disqualify myself from the very thing I'm teaching these people to do. As a leader, you could get so caught up in the work that you forget to be at work. And next thing you know, moments pass, and where you started ahead of the plan of God, because that's what usually happens, God preps you for what is to come. So a sign of good leadership is that God is always prepping you for the next season and you're not playing catch up for the now season. And because he's prepping you for the next season, because he wants you ahead of the plan so that you can qualify and be sustained within that moment, instead of getting to these moments where basically the plan overtakes you, which is exactly where we find Moses Moses, if we go back and recap a little bit of his story because it sets the precedence and the stage. Moses, I find it really interesting that he was in exile before he led his people out of exile. Like, fought, let his anger get the best of him, fights for his people, gonna have to keep fighting for his people, but he runs to the wilderness out of fear and brokenness, and out of that very same fact, stays in the wilderness for the rest of his life. Whilst he leads his people somewhere with new promise, he ends up staying there. We see that Moses never abandoned his staff. When there was an opportunity, he first struck the rock, which was what God asked him to do. He then goes and is supposed to speak to a rock, but then strikes it again. We've heard this a million times. In one passage of scripture, we see that Moses identifies his self-identity is that he is slow of speech. And yet somewhere else in the Bible, it speaks of the fact, I think it's somewhere in the New Testament, it says that Moses was actually great of speech. He was like a great speaker. So either he became one or he was always one, but in his own eyes and his own identity, which is the very thing that held him up, which is probably the basis of most offenses, is what we see ourselves to be. And therefore what you see yourself to be is what you'll project that other people are viewing you from. If you are insecure about your outfit and you walk into a room and people look at the outfit, they could be looking at it because they love it, but you think they're looking at it because they hate it. So now you're offended because you're like, I can't believe they judged me, when the reality is no one judged you. You, out of the filter that you live from, have imposed judgment and actually are judging other people based on what you can't even qualify or quantify their thinking. Moses is trapped in this moment of self-identity. Moses is frustrated. In fact, the moment that he does this, God reprimands him and Aaron and says, you didn't do what I asked you to do. Instead of giving me the glory, you took it for yourself. And because of this reason, you will not enter the promised land. So then Moses goes back to the people, and like every good leader, he goes, look what you have done. Because of what you have done, I will not enter the promised land. Moses, instead of displaying ownership, is actually speaking from a wounded spirit. He's allowed the difficulty of leading people to determine the way that he leads. And I think that one of the things that I've learned in being a pastor is that you can either stay shaped by God and therefore shape what you're leading, or get so caught up in the work that the work starts to shape you. And that is true of most actual acts. When you build something, the work shapes you. My hands changed completely over the 4 months that I was building our house. They were swollen, they were calloused, they started to shift because the work shapes you. You can actually see and look at different sports, and swimmers predominantly have really big shoulders, and soccer players have bigger legs, and it's just what you do can shape you, which is fine in physical things. But I think the challenge for us as leaders is when we understand that we are not just leaders of an organization, we are a church, and the church in its growth point will always create and pose organizational problems, but we should always approach those organizational problems as a body of Christ, not as an organization. Acts 6 is where we see that. As the number of disciples was growing, that basically the Hellenic widows were overlooked in the distribution of food. It tells us that basically it is so easy for the actual logistics of this to actually take over because it's part of it. But in all that I share is, how do you stay someone that is leading spiritually? How do you stay someone that is hearing from God? How do you stay someone that is inputting and pouring out? Rather than allowing the person that left, the person that's angry, the person that won't move, the person that won't get the revelation, the burden of the task, the difficulty of being a husband or being a wife or being a student or being whatever, as well as carrying a portfolio. It is so easy for the work of the ministry to actually start to shape your heart. And this is what I've learned. The heart is basically the window to the soul. It's the eyes of the soul. And the minute you shape that, you change what you see. So, little life update. I finally gave in and I went and got contact lenses. And it's so great. I did not realize how much I couldn't see. And when I got it. The doctor takes you through this little thing, and they take this 3D scan of your eye, and he's like, yeah, everything's perfectly healthy. Actually, specimen is what his words were. I might have put that in there myself. But he says, actually, what happens is over time, the shape of your eye changes, which then changes the way that the light refracts and then hits the retina, and then that changes how you interpret things. And then you no longer see images sharply or even clearly. Depth perception can be off. The way if you've got astigmatism, light changes everything and you can't adapt. And as that cover of the eye changes, so does everything you see. What we're going to do today is correct that by putting a lens in front of it that will then bring things and focus it to the back of the eye so you see correctly. Yeah. So, that being the case, I want to take us through some principles that keep us as leaders safe, keep us growing, so that the picture we see that is in front of us resembles the picture that God is actually sending to us. Yes. As God keeps showing us the vision of what we're meant to be, we are actually perceiving it through the spiritual lens that we should be perceiving it, not the worn physical lens that comes with age, comes with time, comes with experience.
So good.
Obviously an analogy, but I think it's very apt to the fact that our physical nature and its wearing and brokenness is the same way that we will lead from. So how do you mitigate that you are a broken, flawed human that is here to participate in a perfect will of God?
Mm-hmm. Come on.
So, here's number one. Here are some things. I got someone calling me and it's just the United States, the whole country. They need my help again. I can't. I'm busy. Doing the Lord's work. Okay, here's number one. Process through a spiritual system, not your current lens.
Yes.
Something that is, I think, crucial as a leader is before you take all your thoughts to rumination, before you take every one of your feelings to the whiteboard, before you do any of that, understanding that everything you process will come from the lens that you live from. Right. If you are hurt, you're going to process hurt. If you are limited in knowledge, you can only process from the knowledge that you possess. You only know what you know. So one of the greatest things that I can do is actually spend time praying in my heavenly language, speaking in tongues, and filling my spirit before I go and try to process my offenses, my hurts, my problems, my challenges, the Rubik's Cube that is marriage and children and life. Can I encourage you that it is best to go to the mountain and process from a place where you just encountered God rather than try and process from a place where you are currently living from. As a leader, one of the best things you could do is take yourself out the game and put yourself back in the presence of God and then come out of there before you process. The greatest thing that I have learned to do is that very thing. And I can tell you this, that Moses was often meeting in the tent of meeting, and I don't know where the wheels fell off. But somewhere along the lines, he got so frustrated with the job of leading people that he started to blame them for the person that he became. We see a powerful framework in the Bible where Jesus says that we are to love our enemies because anyone can show love for their friends. Which means this, that the framework at hand is that our measure for how we love and interact with the world should be unconditional, based in principle and character, not on context. I should be the same no matter how you treat me. I should stay with the same spirit, same convictions, same attitude, same fruit, irrespective whether you're good to me, bad to me, angry, all the rest, because what actually dictates character that is strong is that it is actually not affected by context, but is exactly who I am no matter what happens. And the only way I think that takes place is when you choose to get yourself back in the presence of God, which is the ultimate convictor, corrector, and calibrator. Lead your week from a place of prayer, not from a place of practice. If all you're going to do is lead from practice, I promise you that over time what will happen is that work will shape you instead of the Spirit of God keeping you shaped the way that He wants you to be, and therefore you leading things. It is easy for the leader to become the person that's being led by the offenses and the difficulties of the things that you do. I want to encourage you, check your sight and align yourself spiritually before you process practically. Number 2, It's easy to get caught in the work and forget to be a work yourself. Can I encourage you, if you're going to stay healthy as a leader, whilst you might have a massive list of all the things that you work through, when was the last time that you actually remembered that you are a work? You're looking at people all day. You're trying to help them grow. You're looking at systems, you're looking at problems, you're looking at goals, vision, the tension point it creates. How often have you wondered if the difference between people crossing over is them or is you?
Yeah.
Moses was angry at these very people. Yet, when Moses died, the second he dies, God's like, time to cross over.
Right.
Could it be that you and I, forgetting to make ourselves a work in progress, is what is actually holding up the progress?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's good.
Understand what you're in. In this church, and you are both a leader or an employee, but you're a leader. We have a leadership culture, which means you lead from every level you live in.
Yeah.
So if it's not working, if there are gaps, what is it in us that can actually grow instead of blaming the surrounding, context? I've watched so many people limit themselves because what they think is if they had a better run at it, they would be a better leader.
Yeah.
But the actual real test of leadership is what you will do with the environment you're in, not what the environment will make of you.
Wow.
No bad leaders, just bad teams. No bad teams, just bad leaders.
Yeah.
And the only way that happens, guys, is make sure that you're a worker in progress.
Yeah.
Make sure that you don't ever allow pride to become your downfall.
Yeah.
And pride would say this: you've graduated from leading. And that only comes when you think that you have to be as good as the actual level of the calling that God has given you.
Yeah.
Let me read this. That is just so, it was fantastic in what Jake preached on Sunday. And it was that Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, no one can interpret it, but I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. This is Joseph's response. I cannot do it. Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires.
Yes.
Every time you're faced with impossible in what you lead, every time you're even faced with a compliment, I want to ask you, what is your response?
Yeah. Yes.
There's only three. I can do it, I can't do it, God will do it.
Yes. Yeah. Come on.
I can do it is just as dangerous as I can't do it.
Yeah.
I can do it is a false sense of actual ability.
Right.
I can't do it is a false sense of what actually does it. And God will do it is where safety is found.
Yes.
A lot of what we do is predicated on the fact that, we understand that God does this. Let's talk about a real hot topic, rest. Rest is one of the most eluding, deceiving concepts, because even when you stay still doesn't mean you're more fueled.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
You could sleep more and not feel better.
Right.
You could vacation and not be fueled.
Right. Yeah.
There is a difference between rest and the perception of rest. Sometimes because we are no longer under strain, we think we're strong.
Right.
Sometimes because we no longer have to lift something, we think we've gotten better. Or sometimes just because we're not being drawn upon, we think we're rested. But the real measure of rest is, can you get back to it at a real level of refuel and carry it and drive it?
Yeah.
And it's not going to happen just because you play golf. It's not going to happen because you slept more.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen because you Netflixed all day.
Right.
It's not going to happen because you ate all your favorite Trader Joe's snacks. It's not even going to happen, can I tell you what I've learned? It's not even going to happen because you did the favorite thing for your soul. You got to ask yourself, are you pouring rest into the same place that is drawing it from you? So what we do is spiritual. It's laborious in our mental and spiritual place. We are pouring out. And even when you're not sitting with people, you're pouring out. Even Jack, whether he knows it or not, is pouring out. Why? He's not building a software company that is just for the world. He's building a software company that is for the kingdom. So what do you think what does that require? That requires spiritual discipline, because you've taken a like a very normal worldly endeavor, and then you've placed kingdom and eternity upon it, which means that the actual forces of darkness are against it. There is a different sense of drawdown. And if what you try to do is replenish strength where you're not losing strength, you're never going to feel refueled. In fact, it has been my learning that it is my time when I spend time with restraint that actually gives me rest. And what does that mean? When I actually sit in moments, and it's the things I say no to that give me rest, because what I say no to actually stops the outpouring in areas that I shouldn't be outpouring. So, for example, things like this. I have learned that whilst I want to relax, do nothing, sit on the lounge, or play sport, that doesn't refuel me. When I say no to that, but then I put a restraint and say, I am going to spend the first portion of this morning in prayer. I am actually going to get lost in worship, and I'm actually going to read my word until I get a revelation, not until I check that I read a chapter.
Yes. It's good.
Because you could be there and not present.
Yeah.
You could be reading and not ingesting.
Right.
But there's a difference when I force myself to find a moment where actually the presence of God hits me.
Right.
And the weak can callous you. This environment is a breeding ground for familiarity. You're around the word, you hear the word, you hear another word, you get another word, you go to another night with another word, then you sit in a Sunday with 2 words, and then you read your word, and before you know it, you know all the words. Challenge yourself not to a point where you read the word and you go, yeah, I've read that. Challenge yourself to read the word till you go, ooh, that hit me.
Yes. Come on.
Like a thriving leader is a leader that actually gets something from the presence of God, because that does something in you. When you do that, all of a sudden, rest starts to form, everything starts to fuel, you start to feel better. And rest for me has not always been about the fact that I sit more. Where do we also know this? The Bible tells us that we won't enter his rest.
Yeah. Right. Wow. Yeah.
The greatest reprieve that I need is in my spirit.
Yes.
That's what I need to be fueled in.
Yes.
And in fact, I would say this even. For some of you that go, man, I don't know if that really fuels me. I would say this, that every single person is spiritually hungry, but sometimes we compensate it with other things that we have become accustomed to compensate it with.
Yes.
Some of us are actually, we yearn for relationships with the opposite sex, but what we're trying to fill is not an intimacy problem. What you're trying to fill is a lack that only comes from the presence of God, and now you're forcing that in your marriage, or you're forcing it in your single life, or you have a habit of looking at things online that you really aren't good for you. You know you shouldn't look at, and they're breaking you down. These things are coming from a gap that can only be filled spiritually. And just because spiritual doesn't taste good right now, neither does eating healthy off the back of eating small shavar. But appetites must be actually engaged and developed for outcomes.
Yes. Come on.
You're preaching.
Come on. That's good.
When I was like in an athletic world, I had to eat things that would be good for me, not that I actually enjoyed all the time. And the only time that I really started to get that was when training was so difficult that I needed a way to get through it. The pain of where I wanted to be needed a fuel that I wasn't actually substituting with. If you're going to be a growing leader, learn how to live from a place of rest. Now, I'm not saying that you don't need a day off. Sabbath is clear that you should choose a day, and you should have structures around your life that help you get a day going. But I want to encourage you, get into the Word of God and get spiritual habits that will refuel the very place that needs replenishing. Second thing, rest takes planning. Ords and I have started to try to do Sabbath. You need to plan that. If you don't plan it, it's not happening.
Right.
Because life is a mixture of always working.
Right.
Someone's got to do the washing. You got to mow the lawn. You got to pick up the dog stuff. You got to get the dog bathed. You got to take the kids places. Sabbath needs planning. If you do not plan to rest, plan to fail. What is your plan around rest? How do you say a respectful no? How do you tell people, hey, I'd love to do that, but that's my 1 day a week. I can't do anything in that time. I'm down for hanging out. If you want to have dinner, if you want to chill, let's chill.
Yeah.
But I just want to how do you plan for that? How do you communicate it? How do you set up boundaries? How do you tell the world? Not everybody Sabbaths on the same day in the same way. So therefore, it is the onus of the person resting to tell people they're resting. It is like a hotel room that says do not disturb. You can't blame housekeeping for knocking on a door they didn't know
Yeah, that's true.
wanted to sleep in.
Right.
Plan to rest. Let the people around you know. I tell all of our execs and Grow Group a rule. After 6 p.m., if you contact me for work, I'll stop answering.
Yeah.
And I'll stop looking at your text messages because I know that you're bringing work on my table. Now, after 6 p.m., you can still call me because we do live.
Yeah.
But call me to hang out.
Yeah.
Call me to go to the driving range. Call me to do something. Call me because you want to come over for dinner. Call me because you want to meet up at the 606.
Yeah.
Learn how to know that there is a time where the work has to stop encroaching on your day.
Yeah.
And the easiest thing we could do is blame everybody else around us. Now, as leadership though, we have to be respectful of people's rest. So as leadership, how do we do that?
Yeah.
My thing is, if everybody's clear, then I think it allows everybody to come to the table and help people do it. I want to encourage you this week, write a plan on how you will rest.
Yes.
And rest has to be even the things that you don't like doing around the house. So you're going to have to do your groceries on a different day.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Very good.
All right, I'll speed through the rest of them. Be more committed to stretching your faith than sticking to what worked.
Come on.
That's very good.
If we don't rest, we tend to try automate life and we want to automate leadership. A lot of leaders end up finding themselves in trouble because you try to automate, set and forget what actually needs faith and a constant relationship with God. This is God's plan and you need His strategies. When was the last time before you got to your work day, you said, God, what do you have for me to focus on today?
Yes.
In Chronicles, we read over and over of people that as they went and submitted to the things that God wanted for them, and as they followed that plan, God would make their way successful and they would actually arrive at their destinations 2 weeks in advance, 6 weeks in advance, finish building things ahead of time. Why? Because when you actually do God's plan, God's way, you get strategies that advance it in ways that your strategies never would.
Yeah.
Start your day with God, what's next for me? Not God, this is what I've always done. Because what you did might have been great for the previous season, but it's not this season.
Right.
Seasons, when you start working out a step with this concept, the works of God start overtaking you because you're no longer in step with the way that they should be outworked.
Yeah.
I know you're driven, but is this a season for that?
Right. Come on.
Yeah.
I know you're strategic, but is this the season for that?
Yeah. That's good. That's good.
You know how many times in my seasons there's been moments where my strategies paved the way for this, and there's other seasons where I've tried to strategize when God wanted prayer?
Come on. That's good.
And there's been seasons where, it was like, I don't know, open the front doors, and then there's other seasons where God's like, just focus on this and that and whatever it might be. If you can stay in step with what God is doing, everything shifts. What is God trying to do through this principle? What God wants is complete reliance and obedience and leading from the Spirit, not leading from your human nature and your own propensities.
Yes.
If this was able to be achieved by your giftings, then God wouldn't be getting the glory.
Yeah.
Great.
How are you leading out of what God is asking you to do? When was the last time you set your schedule based on who God wanted you to meet with? Even Jack, right? He leads this and he comes from a corporate world. I don't know how many times he's ever worked for a faith-based organization, but who has God put on Jack's heart today out of all the volunteers that might want to volunteer for Renee? Who has God put on his heart and go, this one?
Come on.
It has been my experience in leadership that letting a God prompting place me in front of a person puts me at just the right time where God is speaking to them at the same time as I'm speaking to them, and all of a sudden, instead of me calling them to a task, I serve as confirmation for a cause.
Come on.
Yeah.
No one wants to give their life for a task.
Right.
Yeah.
Nobody will come and build your team for the sake of getting stuff done.
Right.
But people will give their life for a kingdom vision, and they will give their life for a cause, knowing that, this faith thing also causes you to get out of task and build people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Are you too afraid of failure, so therefore you make sure everything runs off the back of your good skill set? Or are you okay with collateral because God has called you to build people?
Right.
Yeah.
Moses' journey is riddled with collateral of building people and leading people. But yet, if he could have stayed in that space and not got embittered by the journey, he would have crossed over as well. make sure that you don't just get stuck with what worked, but you keep leaning on what God has called you to do. The difference is this. 2 Bible scriptures, one with Moses, obviously. Striking the rock worked. Cool. But then it worked, but not all results are actually what God wanted. So whilst the water poured out, he missed out. Because what he did was done in his strength, which didn't give God glory. The goal is that what you do should always be a reflector of who he is. How you do it will determine a whole bunch of things in your life. Make sure that what you do is the way that God wants you to do it. The second thing is this. Peter's been fishing all night and he's an expert fisherman, yet he catches nothing. And he says an important phrase, nevertheless, at your word. Throws it over to the left side of the boat and has a catch so big that it starts to sink his ship. You could be working on the same thing, and what you think is you need a team change, a context change, a problem change, a finance change, and the reality is what you need is a change of process. Instead of you going from your head space to your strategy to your team, you need to go from your spiritual place to hearing God to your team. Even if you've already cast it on the left side of the boat, timing is just as important as placement. And God is a God of timing. So whilst you've asked that same person 1,000,000 times to join your team, maybe the person is not the problem. It was the timing in which you asked them that is. And that 7th time when God tells you to speak to them, everything breaks. I want to encourage you, like as a leader, don't stick to what works. Stay in the faith place. Stay in that place that stretches your faith boundaries. When the identity we start with becomes the one we stick with. Don't be the leader you started with. Don't coin yourself as someone who's anything. I want to challenge you this. Be more loyal to the need than you are to your personality. This might not sit well with some of you. It doesn't have to. This is just me speaking, not out of totalitarian. This is theology. This is my experience. I came into this and I've been a different person at so many stages. You might go, well, then what's your identity? Do you have one? Like, it kind of seems kind of flippant. My identity is rooted in the fact that I'm a son of God. I'm here to serve at the pleasure of the King. And anything else to me is fluid. I'm not known by the colors I like. I'm not known by the fact that I'm Hispanic. That's why when people have been like, oh man, it's amazing that you're a pastor, like, and you're really doing it for the Hispanic culture. I'm like, you know what? Like, I just want to be a pastor that is regarded amongst men. All men. I don't care whether I don't want to be good for Latin people. I want to be good just general. Like, I don't have an agenda. I don't have this, like, I've got to be loud and I've got to have a leather jacket. And I don't have a, like, I've got to be a teacher and I've got to be... I honestly just ask myself this, God, who do you need me to be right now? Because when I came into this, I was insecure and I was scared to speak in front of people. And then I found so much comfort in that I was a challenger and that I was driven. And then I realized that some seasons killed things. And honestly, what I've learned is that the best thing I can be is whatever God needs me to be in the moment. And what I love about Jesus, he was both meek and mild and also flipped tables. Part of what I think was such a reflection of Jesus's absolute deity was that he was exactly what he needed to be at every single moment, which required heavenly wisdom. There was a moment to flip tables, and there was a moment to argue with the Pharisees, and there was a moment to walk away from them. There was a moment to heal, and there was a moment to forgive. He just knew exactly. He saw things that no one else saw. And that's why he was just the perfect example of what I think we need to be, which is led by the Spirit. Can I encourage you? If you are going to be a good leader, let your identity be more based in who God needs you to be, not who you've pegged yourself to be. I've seen so many people disqualify themselves in the same way that Moses now included Aaron in his calling. I know you might not be the most strategic, and I know you might not be the most patient, but are you going to own that or sign up for the call that God has put on your life? There are seasons that God has put me in places that require patience, and I'm not patient. So do I then say, I'm not patient, God, therefore I won't do what you asked me to do? Or can I say, you know what, God, I will be what you need me to be, not because I can be it, but just as Joseph said, Lord God, I can't do it, but God, you can. There is not a job you can't qualify for. There's not a room you can't move. There's not a platform you can't speak from. There's not a grow group you can't lead. There's not a financial campaign you can't come to. There's not a thing in this world that you cannot accomplish with a mentality of I can't, and I'm well aware of that, but God can and He will. I will not own and stick to an identity I started with. I will actually cross this finish line being whatever God needs me to be whenever I need to be it. Yes. That to me is freedom, because I'm no longer stuck by the confines of my limits, but I'm actually as big and as vast as God has called me to be. Humility exposes blind spots that become unbuildable terrain. I don't really know all the things that go to being humble, to be honest. Like, obviously I'm the most humble in the world. Honestly, I don't know everything there is to humility, but I'll tell you what, I know what the biggest killer of humility is, and it is insecurity. Insecurity needs validation. You need to be the smartest in the room. You need to be right. And I don't know that insecurity is always visible, but I always know it's feeling.
Yeah.
And the insecure feeling is when environments start to irk you and you feel insulted, or you feel like you need to be bigger, you need to be smarter, you've been misunderstood. Insecurity for me is a feeling that I'm familiar with, not so much something I always know. I've had moments where, man, like, there's been moments where I was sure Audrey was a problem or Gio was a problem. And the reality was, when I looked at it, it wasn't. Yeah. It was just my own insecurity. It was my need to be validated. It was my discomfort with being wrong. It was my discomfort with being quiet. Insecurity is the greatest adversary to humility, because insecurity is when we start to ship pride as a means to disguise what we think we lack.
Yeah.
Pride is this kind of thing where we feel we have to be something. Humility, to me, is another feeling that is kind of like the sense of, man, I know I'm nothing, but I'm not worthless.
Yeah.
There's a difference.
That's very good. Yeah.
I know I can't do anything, yet my value has never shifted.
Yes. Well, yes.
Man, I don't need to be the smartest, yet I still hold so much value in this room. I don't need to be the tallest. I don't need to be the fastest. I don't need to be the biggest. Like, I don't have to be the best at anything. I just know that I've got value because I am owned by my God.
Yes.
He paid for me with His life. Or, depending who you're speaking about in the Godhead, through His Son. And I have value. Value is not set by what I contribute, but by who I belong to. If you can have that, now you can be nothing and not feel like you're worthless.
Yes.
I don't feel like I don't have to be the best preacher. A person once said to me, you know what? Audrey's a better preacher than you. And I was like, oh, good. I can't say it, but I was like, awesome. Like, good. Good for her. Good that you enjoy it. Good for me. Like, she's my wife. Like, yes, I don't know what you mean. And the reality was that for them, it was a leveling chip. Thinking that somehow that was going to hurt me. But the truth is this, I don't have to be the best anymore.
Right.
And any moment where I feel that whole thing rise is a moment where I have pride. Pride excludes God because it means that you want to be sufficient.
Right. Come on.
Pride is a blind spot.
Yeah.
Everything you place on everybody else is usually out of an insecurity you don't want to face yourself.
Yeah, right.
It's their problem. They're to blame. Even if you're in a work meeting, let's say, can I just say people church culture for a second? If you have to defend yourself at every turn, there's a problem.
Yeah.
Work to better.
Yeah.
The goal, as I've gotten older, I just want to win. I don't need to fight.
Yeah.
I used to be a fighter. I loved fighting. It would give me I just loved it. I don't know, I enjoyed it. But then, man, the amount of moments that I fight, and then you have to go back and walk it back with an apology. You're not even in your right brain when you're fighting. It's stupid. Now I'm like, man, I don't need to fight. What I need is a win. And the win sometimes is me apologizing. The win sometimes is me going, let's talk this through. The win looks different at every turn. But can I just tell you, insecurity and ego has no place at a people church table.
Yeah.
If your ego is bruised, your ego is too big. Don't do this out of ego.
Come on. Yeah. Come on.
Don't do this because you got a chip on your shoulder because you got to prove people wrong.
Yeah.
Do this out of better, more sustainable motivations.
Yes.
Do this because you're called.
Yes.
Do this because you'll face Jesus face to face one day.
Yes.
Do this because you want to hear, well done and good,
Yes.
well done, good and faithful servant. Do this not because a man called you. Also know the difference in your heart. Ooh, when they speak over my life, it makes me feel good. Should it?
Yeah.
Right, come on.
Should it?
Good.
That's a sword that if you live by, you'll die by.
That's
Right,
good.
right, exactly. Yes.
Come on.
So if when they speak to you, it makes you feel good, guess what? When they don't praise you, you're going to feel bad.
Yeah.
Right, yes.
When they don't praise you, you'll be overlooked. When they don't praise you, you're undervalued.
Yes.
Is it that you're undervalued? Or you overbuilt foundations on words of praise?
Right. Right.
Good.
Come on, Pastor Chris.
Do this because you're called.
Yes.
Do this because God asked you to.
Right.
Do this because He has put a fire in your heart. Do this because you want to see people like turn away from the gates of hell and
Yes.
redirected to heaven. Do this because your compassion breaks for the people in our city. Do this because you know that from the parking lot to the hosting to the Renée session to everything else, you are seeing people won for the kingdom.
Yes.
Do this because God has called you to do it. Do
Yes.
this because this is your season. Do
Yes.
this because God is
Yeah.
going to use you. Do this because you're not enough and He fills the gap.
Right.
And you are very comfortable with the fact that every single human's greatest piece of danger is that we steward glory. Every time you had a win,
Yeah.
will you keep it for yourself and write a leadership book about it
Yeah.
and all the merits of how great you are with all the giftings you have? Or will you be like Joseph? Hey, every leadership I win, let me tell you about them. They have not been about me, but this is the way that God does it. Like, let's be that church. Let's be that table. Let's be that leader. Let's be that oversight. Let's be that team leader.
Yeah.
Let's be
Very good,
that
Chris.
preacher. Let's be that kids leader. Let's be that grow group leader. Let's never be so full of ourselves that we miss the fact that God did it. Humility is remembering, comes from the word humus. Humus is to come from dust. To be humble is to remember where you came from and where you'll return. And that neither of those things you have any control of. You have no control what you came in with, and you have no control of what you come out with. So you might as well make the in-between actually count by committing it and consecrating it as worship to God and doing what He has called you to do above anything. All that matters more than anything. That doesn't make you a rogue. You still come under what God is doing, the way that God does it. We are a body connected, and severed limbs don't live very often. So therefore, do the things that God has called you to do because God called you to do it. That's the only way you'll serve man,
Yeah.
because man is flawed. For all those in search of a better team and a better leader, you're only going to find slightly better. It's kind of a steal from this column, add to this one.
Yeah, that's so good.
Honestly, every leader I've been under and every Christian friend I know that now in our 40s we talk, and they can't tell me who their favorite leader is. So I'm like, man, well, I miss this from this person,
Yeah.
but I love this from this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This isn't FIFA, and you can't just build the perfect team.
Right.
In fact, this week's message in Brand Me, I'm going to be talking about what is a sustainable brand in an unsustainable environment. How do you become a leader that is sustainable in an unsustainable world?
Come on.
Yeah.
Good.
Imperfect world, yet you still have to show perfect love.
Yeah.
Imperfect world, but you got to show perfect grace.
Yeah.
Imperfect canvas, yet you've got to display a perfect picture.
Wow.
Impossible unless God is involved
Yeah.
and humility is our goal.
Yes. Great.
Good.
So good. So good.
Zane.
I'm wondering if I could do one more.
You can. Yes. 6 minutes.
I'll say this, be wary of when your frustration becomes greater than your faith. As your frustrations increase, so should your faith. It should fuel your faith, not frustrate your faith. It should cause you to push to your knees and to actually shake heaven because you know that God's going to do it, instead of allowing your frustration to become something that deflates you, frustrates you, and causes you to question the faithfulness of God.
Yeah. Very good.
If you want to remain faithful, I've always said it, you've got to remain faith-filled.
Yes. Yeah.
I've actually watched, there's few people in this world that will stay faithful in an unfaithful relationship.
Yeah.
We're going to go somewhere with this. Few people, let's say you're in a relationship and we're observing two people, right? Let's just take us out of it. We're observing two people. Person A steps out of the relationship, unfaithful. Person B is either going to leave the relationship or they're going to take it as license to step out themselves. Because it's like, why should I be faithful if this person's no longer faithful, right? So the faith and the goodwill in the relationship goes out the window. In a very similar manner, that principle crosses over to our relationship with God in our flawed nature. We have deadlines that we have given God when He's the only one that sets deadlines. We've given God deadlines for when He has to show up and how He should show up and with what He should show up with. I want you to show up in this manner because this is the vision I have. I want you to give us a building and it's going to be spectacular with an Easter egg drop that brings everybody else in the building. It's going to be fantastic. And then I want you to show up with thousands of people and thousands of dollars. And I need that to happen by year 3 of the church. I want you to show up with my husband or wife and they need to look like this and it needs to happen in this timing and this is the life we're going to live. I need you to give me this ministry and promote me this way, and I want to be led by this leader because I know what kind of leader I need, which basically means you're still proxy leading. Anyone proxy leading out there? You already have decisions made for how your leader should lead you, which basically means you're the leader and you know more. Sounds like control issues. Or, and that's what happens. And how does it cross over with God? Well, if you think God's not being faithful, why would you be faith-filled? And the minute you actually make that assertion of God, you pack your faithfulness up and you walk away. And what we start to trade it in, as faith leaves, frustration is just imminent. I've been so frustrated in seasons that I lost faith for the thing I was believing for. How is it in one season I'm inspired? Let me close out with this story. 3 minutes. Little Cruzy, now not so little, he's taller than me, has always been my wise little son, man. Like he's just, I remember I'm so frustrated one night service and I'm doing the thing that I do when I'm frustrated on the front row and I go like this. And he bumps me, he goes, "Dad." I go, "What?" He goes, "Remember, it's not always going to be the night you want." But then he goes, "It doesn't mean God's not moving." He would have been like 9. I'm like, shut up. Same thing happened when we moved from Pritzker to Clemente. Odds, for some reason, we ended up in different cars or somehow Odds went ahead of us. And then I'm going to church, but Cruz asked to stay back. And Cruz looks at me and goes, "Hey, Dad." He leans over from the back. I'm pulling in from that street by Jose de Diego, turning a right on Division. And he goes, "Hey, Dad," little head through the seats. He's like, "Hey, Dad, you know when I order a package from Amazon and like you sit there and you wait for it every day, but have you ever noticed that the package is going to come when it's going to come?" I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "And it's kind of pointless waiting in frustration every day?" I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "Make sure you're not frustrated by the empty seats today." Because he filled the ones at Pritzker and he'll fill the ones at Clemente. And he was like, what, 10 or something? 11? You know what I've learned when it comes to frustration or faith? It's a status of your soul, never a status of God's faithfulness.
Wow.
Shift from frustration and fuel your faith. Because without faith, it's impossible to please God. Without faith, you cannot move a mountain. And without faith, you cannot be healed. And without faith, you cannot lead a people. Because if you do not have faith in the place that you're leading the people, but you are filled with frustration, you will lead the people into the very same route. I want to encourage you, replace your frustration and fuel it with faith, and God will do great things. You will cross the finish line. The plans of God that you started with will not overtake you, and God will do great things. This is just some thoughts that I've been wrestling with for myself and hope to be fueled by this very thing, because I want to make sure that the plans of God that God has put me to do not overtake me, but I cross that finish line, and I hope you too as well. So, that is Staffy. We are done. Love you all. See you at Growth Track. Invite some people. Bring people through.